Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, and we've got breaking footage of Zelensky's speech at the NATO summit. If ever there were a more damning image of abandonment and betrayal, I assure you Zelensky couldn't conceive of it. That's the very definition of a collective cold shoulder. As Jack Posobiec put it, NATO is a very exclusive elite club, and Zelensky was made very, very aware that he is not in it. As you may know, NATO powers are meeting in Lithuania, in their capital city of Vilnius, for their annual summit, at the heart of which was supposedly supposed to be discussion surrounding admitting Ukraine as an official member. If you're regular to this channel, you'll know that the potential for Ukrainian membership into NATO was at the center of Russian President Vladimir Putin's justification for invading Ukraine. It's not just Putin. A number of Western scholars and geopolitical analysts warned about this for years. John Mearsheimer of the University of Chicago, George F. Kennan of Harvard, even Henry Kissinger. They collectively recognize that brazen NATO eastward expansion was denounced and opposed by every single head of Russia, from Gorbachev to Yeltsin to Putin to Medvedev, back to Putin. Every single Russian leader told NATO in no uncertain terms, don't do that. We consider NATO weapons and troops at our border an existential threat to the Russian Federation. You've been warned. And our Western leaders turned a deaf ear to those warnings for the last 2 decades, and here we are. So Ukraine is finally going to join NATO now, right? Not so fast. Zelensky found out right away that there was plenty of opposition to such an idea, which obviously would lead to a catastrophic global conflict. If you want to guarantee World War III, admit into NATO a nation that's already experiencing a military conflict with Russia. I mean, it's guaranteed. It's the most brazenly reckless act imaginable. But like Scott Ritter pointed out, Zelensky seems to think that he's at the center of the universe. I mean, he's got all this amazing press. You know, he's been posing for the front cover of Vogue. He's getting hundreds of billions of dollars wheelbarreled to him every month. I mean, the guy has made it no secret that he wants your kids killed on his battlefield, okay? But he quickly found out that he's not at the center of the universe. All of these expectations were shattered upon arrival at the summit when it became apparent that there had been a remarkable reversal in the situation. As you saw in that picture, Zelensky found himself being disregarded and given the cold shoulder by other national leaders present there. In fact, even before arriving at the summit, apparently Zelensky got word that NATO was going to do an about-face, and he sent out a tweet calling their betrayal, quote, unprecedented and absurd. But unfortunately for Zelensky, that betrayal is just getting started. Wait until you see this. But first, gang, are you ready to join the resistance? Because I'm leading a group of dedicated, courageous patriots who can lead a spearhead into the heart of the secular globalist establishment. We punished Bud Light and Target. We've driven CNN and the legacy media to near bankruptcy. We've forced BlackRock to backtrack on ESG. And now we see our glorious Trump-appointed Supreme Court ending affirmative action and protecting religious liberty. In my Insiders Club, I show you concrete steps to take locally and online that will only keep this mass uprising going until the battle is won. So don't wait. Click on that link in my description below and join my Courageous Patriots Insiders Club today. When all is said and done, the turn of events can be attributed really in the end to one thing, and that is NATO's recognition of the failed counteroffensive in eastern Ukraine. What started on June 5th, this counteroffensive, has been by all accounts an unmitigated disaster on Ukraine's part. It's failed to make any significant progress. In fact, with the fall of Bakhmut, Ukraine continues to lose ground. There are a number of reports that its army is getting utterly slaughtered on the battlefield. If they gain any ground one day, Russian forces take that ground back the next. It's become increasingly evident over the last month that Russia's military capabilities far exceed those of NATO. Biden admitted this when he authorized the sending of cluster bombs to Ukraine, which, by the way, are banned by international treaties. When he said this, listen to this.
President, any update on the cocaine?
Mr. President, cluster munitions. Why now?
We're running out of ammunition.
Why are we sending cluster bombs that have been banned by international treaties? Because we're running out of ammunition. That's why. We have nothing else to send. And we reported on this months ago. NATO officials were quietly admitting that Ukraine was running out of artillery. And not only that, they were admitting that NATO was running out. They couldn't keep up with the Ukrainian demand for munitions. And so this cluster bomb transfer is itself a sign of desperation. It's an admission that NATO forces can't keep up with Russian munitions manufacture. Remember, Russia's been preparing for this for over a decade. There is an awoke strand of DNA in the whole of the Russian operation. They don't care about DEI or ESG or any other woke, ridiculous priority that's distracted NATO leaders. Russia's in this to win, hands down, decisively and finally. And more NATO leaders are beginning to admit that. The great Viktor Orban of Hungary is calling on NATO to negotiate a peace settlement. He's openly acknowledging Ukraine cannot win this. The Ukrainian army has been depleted. It's now just a hodgepodge of various NATO equipment from different countries. It's become a logistical nightmare in terms of training. The Ukrainian forces are spent. And every day this drags on, Russian forces conquer more and more territory. It's got to end. The bloodshed has to come to an end. The real tragedy in all of this, I have to say, actually goes back to a George Soros essay written in 1993 on NATO and the New World Order. Soros basically argued that the way to contain a rising, renewed nationalist Russia wasn't by threatening it with NATO troops. And that's because Western populations, he recognized, had grown soft towards casualties. Just ask George W. Bush. NATO populations can't stand high casualty numbers. So a direct conflict with a renewed, reinvigorated Russia was out of the question for NATO forces. But the key here is that softness is emphatically not true of Eastern European populations. They can still stomach mass military casualties. But they didn't have the military technology. And so the diabolical genius, as it were, of Ukraine is that NATO can supply the weapons and technology and intelligence, all the while Ukraine supplies the bodies. That's, in effect, what we've been seeing over the last year and a half. This is why Ukraine will never be allowed to join NATO in the end. NATO troops will never be subjected to death and destruction as long as Ukrainian troops are willing to endure that for them. This is the horrific geopolitical game that's being played out in real time. NATO forces have thus far been determined to fight to the last Ukrainian. And perhaps at the summit, such a futile and frankly cruel and evil policy of Russian containment may finally be coming to an end.